Goedemorgen. Good morning in Dutch. Good to see everybody today. Hope you had a good Sunday yesterday. It was a beautiful day until late in the afternoon. It got a little sprinkly, but other than that, a lot of people walking around noticed that, so I hope that you had a good day. Today is day 29. We're on Monday, April 27th. We're going to be looking at Psalms 91 through 95 today, and also Romans 1 and 2. A psalm that I picked out to share with you today, or the verse, is Psalms 90, verse 12, which says, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Just says, don't take life for granted. Live to the max. Teach us to number our days. Teach us to realize that we have a limited number so that we can do whatever we can to improve the place around us, to live for God, whatever that might be, whatever that might look at, just to take advantage of the days that we have before us. You never know how much time that we do have. All right, Psalms 91 is a psalm that tells us about the security that a believer can have when they stay faithful to God. It emphasizes the confidence of a believer that they can have through any situation that they go through. One interesting note in this psalm, if you look at Psalm 91 verses 11 and 12, those two verses are the ones that Satan quotes to Jesus to try to tempt him to jump off a mountain. He says the angels will come and catch you, so what's the big deal? So Satan even knows Scripture as well. But that's Psalms 91, 11 through 12. Psalms 92 is a beautiful psalm of worship. Now, Jewish tradition typically chose one psalm to be read every day. So Sunday it was Psalms 24, Monday is Psalms 48, Tuesday is Psalm 82, Wednesday is Psalm 94, Thursday is Psalm 81, Friday is Psalm 93, and on the Sabbath day, which is on a Saturday for Jewish people, it is this psalm, Psalms 92. It was read or sung for the morning sacrifice on the day of the Sabbath. It's a song of praise and thanks to God, a song that was to express, we're kind of preparing them for worship, almost like a call to worship in a sense that we would use in our services today. Psalms 93 is a psalm about God's kingly reign, the universal reign that includes all the universe, not just in the world, but the universe as well. Psalms 94 is an appeal to God to judge the earth. Again, this is written for people written in exile, so you can imagine that they were wanting God to act and respond to their enemies, especially the enemies that were oppressing people. And so they were frustrated by that. So it's a psalm that captures that emotion. And then Psalms 95 is a beautiful psalm of a call to worship. I know we've used this in churches before. Notice it's 95, so it's right in the middle of 90 through 100. Like we said, these psalms are going to be used to kind of capture the interest of those that are in exile. And so right in the middle of that is keep worshiping God, even in the middle of the stuff that you're in. Just emphasizing that. And also to learn from the generations of past. Not to make the mistakes, but to remain faithful. If you remain faithful, God will continue to be with you. All right, we're moving on to Romans. Good job, everybody. You read Luke and Acts. You read some historical books. You read about Jesus and his life. We read about the early church and how it's expanding and growing. And now we're getting into what are called the letters, or sometimes a word is called epistles. But they're letters written to churches, mostly by Paul, and Romans is one of those letters. It was written by Paul probably on his third missionary journey. Some think maybe in Cenchrea or maybe in Corinth around 54 A.D. It was written to Christians living in Rome. In chapter 16 in Romans, it talks about five different names or five different house churches that were living there. So that could have been the base of the church. It was predominantly a Gentile church, and it had a scattering of some Jewish people a part of that as well. You'll read a little bit later on that the Jews were kicked out of Rome after Nero started to persecute, and they drove the Jewish folks out of there, and that's where we read about Aquila and Priscilla. That's why they moved back from Rome and came, and that's how they met Paul, because they were booted out of that city. So the purpose of it is that he's first letting them know that he's coming to Rome. And that's right in the beginning chapter. In chapter 1, you can see how excited he was that when you read it today, how excited he was to go and see them. He also lays out the basic doctrine of salvation for the church. This is a beautiful doctrinal piece that he's done. This is the centerpiece of our faith, and it's really about being justified by faith, or being saved by faith, not by good works, not by the law, but by faith, and he lays it out beautifully. It also talks about the relationship that Jews and Gentiles have with each other, and what's this mean? We talked about the controversies they're having in the church about are you supposed to become a Jew in order to really become saved? And so he talks about this relationship that we are to have. And also one thing to note, and you might notice it, but you might not notice it, but he quotes the Old Testament over 70 times in the book of Romans. So Paul knew what he was talking about, knew his scripture. All right, Romans 1, we see the thesis, we see a general greeting, a passionate wish that he could see the people in Rome, but we also see the thesis for the book. That's in Romans 1:16 and 17. He says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentiles. For in this gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it was written, the righteous will live by faith." That's the thesis of the rest of the book, and so make sure you highlight that in your notes. Now, Romans 1 starts off by kind of what he's building is a case against all humanity for their sinfulness, and so he starts with Gentile people. And he says that no one has an excuse not to believe because he's revealed himself through creation. We notice that when you study the cells and you study everything, just everything around us just points to a creator, an intelligent designer. And he says, so no one has an excuse not to believe. But yet people chose to believe in created things like idols or even in themselves. And because of that, God gave them over to their sin. And his wrath, one thing I want you to notice when you read there in chapter 1 about God's wrath, we always think of that it's a lightning bolt coming and taking away. And then God's wrath is carried out in a variety of ways. But note how it's carried out here. He says because they were indulging in all these crazy behaviors, he gave them over to those behaviors. That means he let them do whatever they want to do. And that's God's wrath. We think, well, that sounds like we get free. No, he says because he knows what damages us. And he knows what kind of life will destroy us from the inside out. So his wrath is to let people do whatever they want to do. That's scary to me. When you read that section in Romans 1, you also notice that it sounds a lot like our culture today. A lot of the thinking, a lot of the behaviors that our culture is promoting is talked about in Romans 1. And it's a giving over to. It's a self-indulgent, and they give it over to their own internal desires, to a depraved mind. But it sounds just like our culture today. People think that we're making progress. We're really not. We're going back into paganism. It really is. It's really what it is. So that's Romans 1. So then you're thinking, give it to him, Paul. Really give it to him. That's right. Well, then in in Romans chapter 2, he brings up the Jewish people. These are religious people, and he goes after them as well. You think that you're so hot? You're not that hot as well. You use your religion to try to save yourself, but you can't do that. And then he makes a long list of things of the mistakes and the misbeliefs that religious people have as well. Again, his whole point is he's building an argument that all humanity is lost and in need of salvation. They can't save themselves. So look for those highlights in these first two chapters, and I hope that you learned something today. Hope you have a good day.